Well done, Marvel. So Spider-Man No Way Home picks up immediately after Spider-Man Far From Home, in which, at the end of the movie, Mysterio reveals that Peter Parker is Spider-Man and frames him for all the destruction and death caused by the drones that he used. So in this movie, we see Peter in kind of a tough situation with all of this and trying to grapple with that, and this is kind of destroying his life. So basically, he goes to Doctor Strange and says, "Hey, is there a way that you can get people to forget about the fact that I'm Spider-Man so that we can get past all this?" And he does a spell, and Peter fucks with the spell, and things go awry, and shenanigans ensue after that. You've all seen the trailers. So what I'm going to do, at first, I'm going to do a non-spoiler review, a quick non-spoiler review, which I'll only talk about things that were shown in the trailers. And then after that, I'll give my score, and then I'll talk about spoiler-filled, which will be much longer, and I will definitely also put some timestamps in the video as well, so if you don't want to be spoiled on anything that wasn't in the trailers, stop right there, come back after you've seen it, and then watch the rest of the video. So starting right off with the good as far as spoiler-free goes, this is Tom Holland's best performance in the entire MCU so far. He was phenomenal in this movie, and he has a great character arc. He gets put through the ringer. He goes through a lot of shit in this movie, and this is something that people had been kind of missing and waiting for as far as this version of Spider-Man. He hadn't really gone through all the adversity and all the things that make Spider-Man Spider-Man in this version, but you do get that, or a version of that in this movie, and I think fans will be satisfied with that. It's almost like they hadn't skipped the origin story, but instead what they did was they took 3 movies to tell this Spider-Man's origin story. And I think a lot of people who maybe weren't big fans of Homecoming and Far From Home will really dig that. Also, the villains were great. The returning villains, all the ones that we see in the trailer, I won't talk about anything aside from that. Willem Dafoe in particular is amazing. I think he's even better than he was in the original Spider-Man movie. I think his character is a little less campy in this one. He still has the campiness for sure, but it wasn't quite as toned up as it was in the first Spider-Man movie. So we get definitely the both sides of Green Goblin and Norman Osborn in this movie as well. Willem Dafoe, every scene he was in was incredible. Alfred Molina, of course, was great again. He has a good arc in this movie as well, and both of these guys didn't miss a beat from their characters that they played in their performances in the first 2 Spider-Man movies. So both of those guys, no shock to anyone, were both great. But another one I want to shout out is actually Electro, because Electro was much better in this movie than he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. You know from the trailer, they changed his look. He doesn't look the way he looked in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which kind of kills continuity, but what they did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was so frustrating and so weird that I'm okay that they kind of retconned his character in the way he looks and the way he acts, because he is much better in this one. The performance is much better, or at least basically what he was directed to do. What they did with him, the writing, Electro, this is a way better version of Electro, and I really, really enjoyed what they did with him in this movie. The rest of the villains, Sandman, Lizard, didn't have that much to do. They were good. Thomas Hayden Church was good again. Reza Fons was good, but they didn't have that much to do compared to the other 3. They were kind of just there, to be honest. Performances were fine, just sort of didn't have the great arcs and stand-up performances that the other 3 had. This movie's also very funny. It's one of the funnier MCU movies. I was laughing a ton from start to finish. So many interactions that I won't get into specifics about, but just such great... And that some of the humor in Far From Home people complained about that was more comedic writing, like they were setting up jokes and it was easy jokes. These felt more like the humor came naturally from the interactions between the characters, and almost all of it landed for me. MCU can be a little bit hit or miss for some people when it comes to humor, but I thought in this movie, almost all of it was really good. And this is a very emotional movie. It's definitely the darkest and most emotional movie of the 3 MCU Spider-Man movies. Like I said before, Tom Holland's Spider-Man, Peter Parker, goes through a great character arc in this movie. And the stakes are definitely higher than they've ever been. The first 2 I felt were a little bit safe with what they did. No real big stakes and real weight to very many things that happened in the first 2 MCU Spider-Man movies. That's not the case here. You feel the weight of everything. You feel how important this stuff is. There's a ticking clock to what's going on, and the emotions definitely hit. So many different emotional moments between interactions between the characters, and there's a lot of good messages in there that I'll get into in the spoiler section. But I think, as far as, especially compared to the other two in the MCU, this movie really took it to the next level as far as emotional beats and the stakes of the movie. Now, my biggest issue with this movie is the whole plotline revolving how exactly the whole multiverse thing gets started, the inciting incident, and how and why that all happens, and the decisions that Peter and Doctor Strange make. You've seen a little bit in the trailer of what happens. He messes with the spell, and that basically breaks the universe and causes the multiverse to open and everything. There's even more to that annoyed me that I'll get into in the spoiler section, but that, just in general, I saw it in the trailer, I'm like, ooh, that seems a little weird that that's the direction they're going. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, it was not misleading or anything. I was hoping there'd be more to it. There was, but the stuff they added actually made it a little bit worse, which I'll get to in the spoiler section. But that whole plot line, that section in the movie, was a little bit odd to me, and I feel like Doctor Strange in general acted very inconsistently and very oddly in this movie. And he's been a little inconsistent throughout the entire MCU, so I'm not sure how to feel about him exactly, and kind of torn, and I'm interested to see where they go with him next. But it feels like he's been different in every movie so far. It's like they're not exactly sure what they want him to be and what they want his tone to be and his personality. So I thought that was weird, and I'll get into more about that in the spoiler section. But that's basically all I'm going to say in spoiler free. So I really love this movie overall. I thought it was great. There was great fan service that worked and was earned and landed. Great emotional moments. I thought there was some great action here, which I forgot to mention in the main positive section. But the action was great. Tom Holland's best performance as Spider-Man. Really funny. The villains were all great. So much great stuff in this movie, and there's so much more to talk about in the spoiler section. So I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. And there we have it, guys. I'm stopping the spoiler free. We're now getting into spoilers. I'm going to put on the video, and I'm going to put timestamps to say when we're starting the spoiler fill. But one last time, this is a spoiler warning. I'm going to get into everything that happened in this movie that you do not see in the trailers, although a lot of people expected a lot of it. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Andrew and Toby show up in this movie. And it's amazing. I'm like, I feel like if they show up in this movie, they might take away from Tom Holland, and it's going to be all about the gimmick of, ooh, look, it's Toby. Ooh, look, it's Andrew. It's not that. They add to the movie. They feel like their presence was warranted. It feels earned. And they have some great interactions with the other Peter. But I'll get back to that. I'm going to kind of go chronologically here. So just kind of walk through the movie and certain things that I want to talk about that are spoiler filled. So first off, I'm going to start right with the inciting incident and everything that happens between Peter and Doctor Strange that kicks off the opening of the multiverse. If there's anything to talk about before that, I would say that there's some good moments before that for sure. I mean, we see Peter living his life and what this does to him, and he has some good conversations with MJ. The rooftop scene I liked when she was reading the paper and they were talking about things and kind of trying to get away from everything. And then, of course, I almost forgot to mention this. Charlie Cox, Daredevil, Matt Murdock shows up in this movie, and it was awesome. This is one that I am not that surprised about once it actually happened, but I'd kind of forgotten because there's so much talk about Toby and Andrew and about the villains and potentially some other things. And he had come up earlier. A lot of people were saying, oh, maybe he's going to be Peter's lawyer. I'm like, oh, yeah, that would make sense. But I had totally forgotten about him. So when he showed up in the movie, he's like, oh, that's so cool. And people clapped a lot throughout this entire movie. This is by far and away the most I've ever seen people clap, the most times at least. But people clapped for Charlie Cox, they clapped for Alfred Molina, they clapped for Willem Dafoe, they clapped for Toby, they clapped for Andrew, they clapped in a mid-credit scene that I'll get to. but it was like at least 5 or 6 instances of people clapping and cheering, which was incredible. It was I've never seen anything like it. As far as interactivity, this is probably I've never had a theater experience like this before. I've had some great theater experiences, but it was never like this to where people were so invested and clapping and cheering at so many different things. This is the first time that's ever happened, and I was surprised because American audiences don't tend to do that much. Like I see videos of other countries where people get really into it, and you see it a little bit with stuff like Endgame and Infinity War, but I've never seen it nearly to this level, to where people clapped and cheered at so many different things. So that was cool. Charlie Cox showing up was great. Did he need to be in there? Not really, but it was fun to see him in there, and I can't wait to see what they do with him in the MCU. I'm not exactly sure if this is going to be the Netflix version of Daredevil, if they're saying that that's canon now, or if it's going to be a new version of Charlie Cox and, slight spoiler for Hawkeye, Kingpin. I don't know if I'm guessing they're probably going to be new versions of them, because they're like a couple of people have pointed out there's some issues if they say that the Netflix stuff and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all that is canon, because how are you going to explain how Cottonmouth and Blade are the same person? Like that doesn't make any sense. They did it with Gemma Chan kind of, but she a little bit different. She looked completely different. She was painted blue in Captain Marvel. You can't even tell it's the same person between that and Eternals. So that would be a strange thing. That would be very difficult to explain. And also, Alfre Woodard, I think is her name, who's in Civil War, was also in Luke Cage. So I'm guessing it's going to be different versions of them. They're going to basically be the same character, but the stuff that happened in the Netflix shows won't be canon. I don't know anything. That's just what I'm guessing. So it was cool to see him. So I guess now I'm going to jump right into the inciting incident, the whole spell and everything that causes the multiverse to basically open up. So to try to kind of get to the core of my issue with this, and there's more. So earlier in the movie, in the meeting with Charlie Cox, he says, "Don't worry about any of this. None of this will stick legal wise, but in the court of public opinion, that's a different story. I mean, people are still going to hate you. Some people are going to, especially conspiracy theorists. And you see throughout the first part of the movie, it's kind of split between who believes Peter and who believes Mysterio, which is a little akin to certain things going on today, but I won't get into that." So we get that where he says, and by the way, the brick moment was awesome. He catches a brick and he's like, "I'm a really good lawyer." It feels weird that nobody questioned that, but it was a fun moment anyway. It's fine. Nice little cameo. So we find out that he doesn't need to do anything legally, but because of all the controversy and all the public opinion stuff, it still kind of destroys his life and the lives of his friends. Peter and MJ and Ned aren't able to get into MIT because of all the controversy surrounding everything that happened. And they literally say that in the letter, that they can't accept him because of that. So Peter decides immediately, without doing anything else, and there's more to that, which I'll get to go to Doctor Strange and say, "Hey, look, this is ruining my life and the lives of my friends. Can you maybe turn back time and make it before people knew that I was Spider-Man?" He's like, "No, I don't have time stone anymore." And it's kind of, when we messed with time, it was to bring a bunch of people back. That was a little more important. I understand that this sucks for you and your friends, but people go through this kind of shit all the time. And Peter's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry." And wait a minute, Strange's like, "Wait a minute, there's a forgetting spell." So he decides to do that instead. He'd make people forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, because that way, none of this controversy would be there and they'd be able to go to college. So the idea that this whole thing starts because Peter and MJ and Ned can't get into college is on its face not horrible, but once you get into it a little bit more and realize the ramifications of all this, it seems pretty minuscule compared to how important and how dangerous this really is. So my next issue is they don't talk about it at all beforehand. They don't talk about the specifics of what they want to do, if they want literally everyone to forget or only certain people to forget. And Strange literally just starts doing the spell with Peter right there in the room, which is another one of my issues. And Peter's like, "Wait a minute, no, just like you see in the trailer." He's like, "Wait a minute, no, I actually want Ned to know, and then I want MJ to know, and I want MA to know, and I want the Avengers to know." And Strange does keep changing the spell And then eventually, because Peter keeps talking, all these things go wrong, and then the spell goes bad, and it's corrupted, I guess they call it, and then the multiverse opens. So, this is pretty weird. First of all, like I said, that they wouldn't talk about it beforehand, the specifics of it, and what exactly they want to do. Okay, so you want everyone, or just want these people to know? Figure that out before you start doing the damn spell, and then once you do, don't have Peter in the room with you. If it's really this easy to fuck up, don't have Peter in the room with you while you're doing the spell. That seems wildly irresponsible. And it seems so irresponsible that Strange doesn't put some more thought into this. I mean, he's a grown man, and Peter's a kid, and they kind of address that, and Strange is like, oh yeah, we've saved the universe together, kind of forgot you're a kid. He'll make mistakes, but Strange is a grown man. He's fucking Doctor Strange, and he is being extremely irresponsible with this. I mean, how does he not think to maybe just not do this in the first place because of how dangerous it is? And if he's going to, figure it out beforehand, figure out the details of it beforehand, and don't have Peter in the room if it's this easy to fuck up. It's crazy that Strange did all this and didn't really think any of this through. That took me out of the movie a little bit. By far and away my biggest issue with the movie. But let's move on from that and get to the good stuff. Or we'll get to the really good stuff eventually. But so the villains start coming back, and first we see Doc Ock, which people cheered for, and then he has his little fight with Peter, and Peter... Well, first he tries to, talk to the lady. Oh, I gotta go back a second. Sorry. I'm trying to do this all in one take for the most part, and I'm running through the movie. I've only seen it once. I might have to backtrack a little bit sometimes. Doctor Strange mentions to Peter, he's like, hey, so you called them, right, to try to appeal their decision? He's like, Peter's like, you can do that? And Strange's like, are you kidding me? We did this whole thing. We did the spell and messed everything up, and you didn't even call them? So first of all, Peter should have called them, of course. But again, another issue with Doctor Strange in this movie, how does he not ask Peter that before he does the spell? Like, oh, dude, so frustrating. So because of this, Peter goes to talk to the superintendent, I think. And I think that's who she is, something like that. And talks to her, and he's like, hey, can you help maybe get my friends back into MIT? And he struggles with the wording of it and says MIT is dumb. And it's like, no, that's not what I meant. And, he's not very good at this kind of thing. Then Doc Ock shows up, and he gets his spider sense. Peter has a spider sense, which I loved what they did with the spider sense in this movie. I thought the way they visualized it, the way they made it sound, just the whole execution of that. They've never done anything like that in the MCU so far, and I thought that was so good, because they haven't done very much with his spider sense yet, even though they've talked about it a lot, calling it the Peter Tingle. But this is the first time where his spider sense is actually really integrated into the movie, and I love the way they executed that. Doc Ock shows up, they have a little fight, like you see in the trailer. He's like, you're not Peter Parker. He's not the Peter that he knows. And Peter takes over Doc Ock's arms using the nanotechnology, and he's able to capture him, and then talks to the lady, and she's like, oh, because he saves her, and she's like, oh, you're a hero. And this is kind of a theme throughout the movie with several different Spider-Men. Peter tries to deny it. He's like, no. She's like, yes, no, you're a hero. Accept it. And she's like, I'm going to try to get you and your friends into MIT. He's like, great. Green Goblin shows up, which more cheering. But before they get to fight, Strange teleports them away. Doc Ock gets put in this little... he gets put in this little, chamber where all the villains are put in, where they can't do anything. They're basically stuck in there and captured so that Strange can send them all back once they're all there. Lizard's already there. Strange said he found him. And then he sends Peter out to go find the rest of the villains. First up is Electro, which, like I said in my spoiler-free review, Electro is so much better in this movie. Such a badass. And it's basically just Jamie Foxx playing himself, but that's totally fine. Honestly, it's so much better than what they did in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then Sandman is also in the movie, and he is a good guy at first, because the way things ended in Spider-Man 3, he's friends with Peter, and he's like, hey, how can I help? And they both defeat Electro together. And then Peter uses this thing that Doctor Strange sent him, or gave him, you basically shoot it at them, and it teleports them into Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, and it puts them in their chambers. And that's what he did with Electro. And then Sandman's like, wait a minute, what are you doing? Did you just kill him? And then Peter has to do it to him. before he, tries to attack him or something. So they get them all in there, and there's some fun little interactions between the villains and the heroes. The whole thing with them making fun of Doc Ock's name, I didn't love that. That was one part of the humor that I didn't exactly love. That was a little weird. And, some fun interactions with Electro and stuff. And then you get Doc Ock talking about how he saw Norman, Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, on the bridge. And he's like, well, he's been dead for years. He's like, you're fighting a ghost. Because all these people, they come back. They came into this universe at the point, I think the way they said it is at the point where they were about to die fighting Spider-Man. I think that's where they explained it. And they also said they all know the identity of Spider-Man, which Electro doesn't, which is strange. So maybe that isn't actually what happened. Maybe that was just Doctor Strange's theory, and that's actually not what happened. But they end up, Peter ends up finding Norman because he is visiting Aunt May at her store. And at first we see a scene with him in the alley where he smashes the Green Goblin helmet. It's like, I'm done with it. And we see him being normal Norman Osborn in the store, and it's strange, but it's also nice. He's like basically acting like a goofy, crazy homeless guy. And you see him like stealing donuts and stuff. And he's like, I want to help. I want to do anything can help. So Peter takes him back to the sanctum. And he's walking around, unlike the other villains, although Strange ends up, capturing him too. So we got all the villains at this point, and Strange is about to send them back to where they came from so they can die fighting Spider-Man. And Peter's like, no, we can't do that. We have to help them. We can cure these people. None of them are bad people. They had things happen to them that turn them into who they are. So Spider-Man, being the good guy that he is like, we got to cure them. Strange is like, no, we can't do that. We have to send them back to where they were. Peter takes the box with the spell in it, the corrupted spell in it, from Doctor Strange, and they have a fight. Peter beats Doctor Strange, which I don't love that, because Doctor Strange is supposed to be one of the most powerful people in the entire MCU, and Peter beats him because of math. I mean, it was cool that he was able to figure out the what's the name of that place? Not the quantum realm. Damn it, I can't think of the name of it. But in Doctor Strange, this different realm that they go to, it happens in the first movie. It's the first Doctor Strange movie, and then it happens in this. I'm sure I'm going to think of it at some point, but I can't off the top of my head right now. The Dark Dimension. Is it? No, it's not. Is it Dark Dimension? Something Dimension. Mirror Dimension. Jesus Christ. And so they have a fight in there, and Peter figures all these things out, figures the Mirror Dimension out because he's a math whiz, and he's like, oh, this is geometry. Which is cool, it's a fun idea, but it seemed a little bit much to me that he's able to beat Doctor Strange because of that. And he does, and takes Doctor Strange out for a good portion of the movie. Again, I don't love what they did with him in this movie. It seems like they depowered him and made him act very strange, no pun intended, in this movie. So we'll get back to that. And then, so he comes back and he frees all the villains. He's like, I'm going to cure all you guys. So they go back to Happy's apartment with all this dark technology, and they start curing them, and he cures Doc Ock first. Which is really nice, because we know Doc Ock is not a bad guy. Just the robot arms took control of him, and he's the only villain of these that actually, in his own movie, died a hero originally. So they cure him, which is a really, really nice moment, because he's been acting like villain Doc Ock throughout the movie so far, and then he acts like normal, what the hell is his real name? Otto Octavius. He acts like normal Otto Octavius, and it was a nice moment between him and Norman. He's like, good to see you, Norman. Good to see you, buddy. And that was cool. And he's basically a good guy throughout the rest of the movie, which a lot of us kind of figured that Doc Ock wouldn't necessarily be a villain throughout the entire movie. We thought he'd get a redemption arc at some point and help the heroes out, which he ends up doing. And then they almost cure Electro. Peter puts this thing on him, this little device that takes a while, and it has to go all the way around all the green lights for it to fully cure him. And then Peter's spidey senses start going off, and we, just like him, are kind of wondering what the hell's going on, because we don't know. And this was a phenomenal scene, just very ominous, just an impending sense of doom and danger. I'm like, what the hell is going on? We don't know what's happening. Peter doesn't either, but his spider sense is going off. So he's looking around like, what the hell? And all the other characters like, what's wrong, Peter? And we're all like, geez, what is about to happen? I'm started like getting chills. Like, oh my god, this is done very well. He webs up Norman Osborn, who we thought he had gotten rid of Green Goblin when he destroyed the helmet. But Green Goblin has been hiding in there this entire time, and he takes over, and basically Electro is so close to being cured. We're like, okay, if he gets cured, this will be fine. He takes the thing off when it was one little click away from curing him. So he's like, nah, man, I like all this power. I like being bad. And he takes it off. Willem Dafoe, Norman Osborn frees himself from Spider-Man's web. This huge fight ensues, and it was a great fight. Norman beats the shit out of Peter for a while, which he's a badass. I mean, he doesn't need a suit or anything. He's a straight up badass. And now Sandman turns bad again, which confused me a little bit. Well, my video cut out because I ran out of space on my computer, so I had to delete some files in order to create space to continue filming. I thought it accidentally clicked a button to end the video, which I was like, God damn it, I was mad at myself. But here we are. I didn't really want to do much editing with this portion, with the spoiler-filled portion, but, you know, I'm going to have to do a little bit. So I'm just going to continue right where I left off, which is talking about the battle in Happy's apartment and Sandman turning bad again, which was a little confusing, but I'll get to again later. Great fight. Green Goblin beat the shit out of Peter. Like I said before, didn't need the suit to do it. And what ends up happening is, and I saw this coming, there's a certain point in this movie, I think it was once they got to Happy's apartment and just the way they were filming her scenes and the way she was walking around doing certain things, like, oh, May's gonna die. And she does, which is a very sad scene. We get there because he's fighting Green Goblin. May is always there to protect him. She's a badass. This is a younger version of Aunt May, so it makes sense that she is getting into the fight. They actually give her something to do in this movie besides look around and look hot, which is fine, but this is even better that she gets some actual character development and things to do. And she saves Peter from Green Goblin. Green Goblin ends up hitting her with his hover... I don't know what the hell you call the damn thing. The hoverboard, the thing that he flies on. Hits her with that, and I thought she died immediately. Oh, shit. And then they kind of fool you, because then he throws a pumpkin bomb, and they're like, oh, she's definitely dead now. And then it seems like she might be okay. And they think, oh, she is going to die. And then, oh, maybe she is going to be okay. And then so they have a little conversation, and she ends up giving the with great power comes great responsibility line, which basically makes her Peter's Uncle Ben, which, like I was talking about in the spoiler-free section, kind of makes this his origin story. And he finally gets to go through the arc that every Spider-Man goes through that we've been waiting for him. And then she starts collapsing. It's like, oh, shit, so she is going to die. Very, very emotional scene. It's not that I feel a ton for Aunt May as a character, but I felt for Peter's reaction. That was why I got so emotional, is because his reaction, and Tom Holland does such a great job in this scene, just like he did with Tony's death, but this one goes on a lot longer. So you really feel for him. You're like, oh God, this is gut-wrenching, because she is his Uncle Ben, and now he's gonna lose it. And he basically does, and the other Peters are the ones that bring him back to reality, basically. This is going on way longer than I expected, but whatever. I had so much fun with this movie, I'm just going to keep going chronologically. And we see Happy, and he knows what's going on, and we see the look on his face, which is heart-wrenching, and he says, Peter, get out of here, and he gets arrested. Happy does, and then Peter runs away. Then we get the scene back at Ned's grandma's place where, oh, by the way, there was a hint earlier to something that ends up happening in this scene. Ned mentions when he meets Doctor Strange, he's like, my grandma's always thought that there's been magic in our family, so how do you know if you're magic or not? And Strange just kind of pushes it aside. A lot of people had problems with Ned being magic. I don't. I'm okay with it. And they're also like, oh, he's able to open a portal right away. A couple of different things with that. First of all, I think there might be some people that are more naturally magic than others, which is, they kind of hinted at earlier with him. Strange, it took a while for him to train. His hand was injured. He was very stubborn. It was all in his head. I think it was a totally different situation. Ned's able to open the portal. He's like, oh, I wish Peter was here. And she's like, wait a minute, do that again. He almost opened the portal. I wish Peter was here. And he opens the portal, and then a Spider-Man shows up. And I noticed right away it wasn't Tom Holland. A lot of people didn't. But I'm like, I don't think this is Tom Holland, because why would he be walking around in an alley with his suit on, and he's not saying anything to them? And he looks a little taller, and the suit looks a little different. He starts running, and it's like, oh, that's definitely not Tom Holland. He starts talking, and I can tell it's Andrew Garfield. Then he takes his mask off, and people lost. It's like, holy shit, it's fucking Andrew Garfield. He's actually in the movie. And then he's like, oh, so that's not the right Peter Parker. He tries it again, and this time we get Tobey motherfucking Maguire. And it was awesome. He's just in regular street clothes, and he looks older, for sure. I mean, he doesn't really look like he would be Spider-Man anymore, for the most part. But here he is, and it's awesome. Awesome to see these guys back. Such a good moment. People lost their minds when they came back. Biggest claps, biggest cheers throughout the entire movie. And then they're like, oh, okay, so is there somewhere that he usually goes, when something's on his mind, when he needs to clear his head? And it's the Statue of Liberty. And they have this little fun conversation where Andrew's like, I go to the Empire State Building, he's got a better view. And then they go there. And also, there was a scene where Peter's up there and he's watching the newscasts from J. Jonah Jameson, who uses May's death to basically get political points and talk about how Peter's he's a menace to everyone, everything like that, kind of very Alex Jones-like. And so they get there, and we don't see other two Spider-Men don't talk to him right away. MJ and Ned give him this huge group hug, which was nothing. They didn't have to say anything. They didn't break the tension with a joke. It was a perfect scene. It was an amazing scene, and they let it sit. A really good thing they did with this movie, which the MCU does tend to struggle with sometimes, is they let the emotional moments sit. When Aunt May died, they sat with it for a while, and they didn't try to mess it up with a joke, which is awesome. The other two Spider-Men show up, and they're like, I'm sorry for your loss. And they try to say, like, oh, I know what it feels like. He's like, Tom's like, no, don't tell me you know what it's like. And he ends up letting them, and, Toby talks about Uncle Ben, and then Andrew talks about Gwen Stacy, which was an incredible... By the way, Andrew Garfield steals this movie. He was amazing. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite actors in the world right now. As much as I have some issues with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, particularly the second one, he was amazing in this movie, and he might be now my favorite Spider-Man. I don't know. They're all so great. But he, just when the three of them were on screen together, he seemed like he was the most in his element. And he talks about Gwen. He's like, oh, she was my MJ. Very emotional moment, which they kind of do something with that later, which I'll get to. It just, everything, you could see the look on his face, and it felt so real. Garfield emotes so well. He did that. He was great in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. My issues with him had nothing to do with him. And he's great again here. Maybe even better, because better writing and better directing. But just everything that he says and the expressions and the emotions were so, so good. They have a great conversation about loss and how Peter's like, I'm done with it. I'm going to kill Green Goblin. She died for nothing. I should have never tried to fix them. And the other guys kind of talk him. They're like, no. This is who you are. This is what we do. This is at the core of who Spider-Man is. Let's not forget that. And we've all been through this. Don't let it change you. Don't let it lead you down a wrong path, which it did for us. And it almost does in the end, but they stop him. And then the big final battle ensues where all the villains show up. And Green Goblin is noticeably not there at first. Sandman's, again, bad again, which I'm very confused about what exactly he's trying to do. I mean, he does say he wants the cube or whatever so he can get back to his timeline, to his universe, sorry. And they have this battle, and the action's really cool. Electro is awesome in this scene. And then, you get some character moments too. Doc Ock shows up, and he seems bad at first, which we're like confused, like what the hell happened? But no, he's faking it. He's actually good, and he fixes Electro immediately without having to put this thing on him that takes like a minute to finish. Fixes him immediately. They fix Lizard, they fix Sandman, because there's a scene that I skipped over a little bit where they're kind of in a lab all creating these cures for all these people, which the fact that they're all able to do that so easily might be a bit of a stretch, but it didn't necessarily bother me that much. There are some fun character interactions in there too. And there's also a fun interaction before the battle where there are so many different things. They talk about, the web shooters and how Toby shoots it out of his wrist and like, do you shoot it out of there and any other places, which is really funny. There's a scene where Andrew Garfield he cracks Toby's back because his back has been hurting. And they call out that he's an older Spider-Man now, which I liked. I liked that they acknowledged that. So for them, it's how old they are now. And I guess it's 2020, whatever, 4 or 5, whatever, in the MCU at this point. So they're older, especially Toby is an older guy at this point. And I like that they acknowledge that and have these fun interactions about, the differences and the similarities between them. The web shooters, like, oh, do you shoot webs from anywhere else? He's like, no. He's like, he really doesn't want to talk about it. This guy, this is kind of personal. And then Andrew talks about, oh, you guys have fought these amazing villains like aliens from outer space and this big black goop alien. I'm like, I fought a guy in a rhino suit. And then he's like, I'm lame. And then Toby lifts him. He's like, dude, you're amazing, which is a great scene because his movie is called The Amazing Spider-Man. And just because all these guys are trying to lift each other up and make each other feel better, which is so cool. So many great interactions. I'm probably missing some of them, but just amazing stuff. And they weren't there just for the gimmick. They felt needed and they added to the story, but without taking away from the fact that this is Tom Holland's movie. They struggled to work together a bit at first, but Tom Holland basically brings them together, and on the surface might seem weird that he's the one in charge because he's a kid, but he's worked with the team, he's worked with the Avengers, and there's a fun moment where he's like, I was in the Avengers, and Toby's like, that's really cool. What are the Avengers? And then they end up coming up with this system where you call one of them Peter 1, Peter 2, and Peter 3. Then they work much better together. They're able to cure all of these people. There's a fun little interaction between Electro and Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker, where he's like, nah, man, I'm good. But Electro's like, wait, so I figured because you're in New York and you're helping poor people and all that, I thought you'd be black. And then Andrew's like, I'm sorry, man. He's like, there's probably one out there somewhere, which is a hint to Miles Morales. I'm sure we're going to get him eventually. We know Aaron Davis is around in the MCU. We could get Miles in the Sonyverse. Some people are theorizing maybe Andrew Garfield is like the older Peter Parker in the Sonyverse, and then we get Miles Morales, which I am all for. That would be totally awesome. And that was a fun little moment, and Garfield's delivery on it was perfect. And then a nice little interaction between Sandman and Toby. So all the Spider-Men get to interact with their individual villains. They cure everyone, and then Green Goblin shows up. Because we knew, he's like, where had he been? He shows up, flying on his thing without the costume, which is fine, because the costume is really goofy. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need the costume to be awesome and badass and menacing. So he gets there and throws some pumpkin bombs and blows up the Statue of Liberty, or at least the stuff around it where they were building it up again. And MJ falls, which is a scene from the trailer. And a lot of people predicted that, oh, okay, Andrew's going to catch her to make up for the Gwen thing. That's exactly what happened. And just because we knew something was going to happen doesn't mean it isn't amazing, because it was. Tom Holland's Peter, tries to catch her. Goblin grabs him so he can't. Andrew Garfield jumps down, catches her, saves her life. And she's like, thank you, are you okay? And he's like tearing up. He's so emotional about it. I can't imagine everything he was going through that moment, because he saved someone else, so he kind of made up for it, but also he's never going to get Gwen back, and that's always going to weigh on him. But it was good for him to save someone else. I imagine that felt good, even though the sting will always be there. So many emotions going through him, and he portrayed that perfectly. Some people wish they would have stayed on that scene a little bit longer. I'm fine with it, because there's a battle going on, and I know they do this in some movies. If there's a battle going on, you really shouldn't spend too much time on this kind of thing. Get back to fighting. There's important things to do. Talk about that later. And at this point, Doctor Strange came back, and he's like, they tell him that Ned created the portal. He's like, oh, interesting. There's going to be more to that, for sure. But also, the fact that he was taken out for a good portion of the movie by Spider-Man still doesn't quite sit right with me, but I'm over that. It's not that big of a deal compared to how amazing the rest of the movie is. And Peter's fighting Green Goblin on his own, and he starts to turn the tide, and he starts to kick his ass, and he's about to kill him. He grabs the thing, and he's about to stab him with it, Green Goblin's own speeder thing. And Toby stops him. He didn't say anything. He just grabs it, and he looks at him. He's like, just gives him a look, which basically says, don't do it, don't do it. And Tom, he settles down. He's like, without saying anything, again, no dialogue. He's thinking like, yeah, you're right. And then Green Goblin stabs Toby, which my heart stopped for a second. I'm like, oh no, Aunt May already died. You're going to kill Toby now? He ends up being okay. They just wanted to scare us for a second. He's like, I've been stabbed before. It's fine. It was a funny little moment. He's perfectly fine. But they had to give us a little heart attack there for a second. And then they end up curing Goblin too, which is nice. And then there's this... The multiverse is really starting to open up because of what Goblin did with the pumpkin bomb. He fucked it up even more, and Strange is like, they're all coming in. Every single person in every universe that knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And Tom Holland, is like, okay, we have to make everyone forget about Peter Parker, period. And Doctor Strange is like, no way, we can't do that. And there's this nice moment between them, which Doctor Strange is like, we don't want to forget you. He says we, like people that love you, we. And he includes himself in that. So that was a nice little moment between them. Like, oh, he loves the kid. And then Peter's like, no, it has to be done. Strange is like, okay, go talk to your friends. Go make any last-minute goodbyes. He does that, and Peter... This is another small issue I have with the movie. Peter talks to them, MJ and Ned, and he's like, I have to do this. I'm sorry. And they're like, come find me when you're done. He's like, yeah, I will. And what confuses me is, why doesn't he just stay with them? Just stay holding her hand, and then when the spell is over, he'll still be there holding her hand, and then you can just... It'd be much easier to explain to her what'll happen. Be like, hey, I'm here because we knew each other, we were dating, there's a spell to make everyone forget about me, and that's why we're still here holding hands, and that's why you don't remember why we're here. I think that's fairly easy to understand. Like, I think she would buy that. And then... But he didn't. He just left and then tried to meet up with them later, which didn't... He decided not to, tell them about everything and decided just to order a coffee or whatever because he sees how happy they are. And I love that. I think it's a great message to end the movie with. And it's a great direction to take the character because that's what Spider-Man would do when he sees how happy they are, even though it didn't really make sense that he didn't just stay with them. Another minor issue I have with this movie is just a little plot hole. So, they make everyone forget about Peter Parker, right? What about pictures? What about videos? What about text messages? What about his contact in your phone? What about newspaper articles? So, none of that, all that just disappears. I mean, it is magic, so that kind of makes sense, but just a little bit of a minor issue there. And then, what about all the memories you have with him involving other people and other things, and then when you are just with him doing things, like how do you fill all those gaps? Like it doesn't quite work, but things like this are always going to have plot holes, so it is what it is. And then there's a nice scene with him at the grave and then talking to Happy, and Happy doesn't remember him, but he knows who Happy is, and he doesn't tell him anything, he doesn't tell anyone. He's completely on his own now, nobody knows who he is. And at the end of the movie, he has a new suit, a classic Spider-Man suit. He's not Iron Man Jr. anymore. And he goes off on his classic Spider-Man adventures, which is great. And I don't know what they're going to do with him, if he's going to stay in the MCU. I think they said he will. But it's going to be smaller Spider-Man adventures, which is awesome. If he goes in the Sonyverse, that'd be cool too. I'm totally good either way, but I love the direction they're going with the character, that he's finally the Spider-Man that we know. This completes his origin story. And now he can do his traditional Spider-Man thing, which a lot of people have been waiting for. Can't wait to see what they do next. Great direction to take the character. Great ending of the movie. So yeah, I love this movie. I don't think it's perfect or like one of the best comic book movies of all time. One of the best MCU movies. I'm not quite there. It's almost my favorite Spider-Man movie. I'm going to actually do a Spider-Man tier list in a bit. I'm going to record it right after this. And I will post it. I don't know the day. I don't know when this will be posted, but that'll probably be the next day or something. But anyway, there's two mid-credit. There's a mid-credit scene and an end-credit scene. The mid-credit scene shows Tom Hardy at a bar where he's talking to this person like, oh, so there's really all these superheroes here? And he keeps asking the question over and over. And then he disappears. He goes back to his own universe. It's like, oh, it was cool to see Tom Hardy, but that was kind of a waste. It's like that really, all he did was come here to a bar and then leave again. I wish he could have been in the movie a little more, but I understand why he wasn't. And then because Sony and MCU, we weren't exactly sure what they were doing with everything. But he leaves behind a little piece of the symbiote. So what that means is the symbiote can take over someone in the MCU now. Maybe we get the Dark Peter. Hopefully they do it a little better than they did in Spider-Man 3. And maybe we get a Venom at some point. And maybe a different version of Venom in the MCU. So they're leaving it open for that, which is cool. The post-credit scene, which is basically a trailer for Doctor Strange 2. And I loved it. I totally loved it. I was a little confused, thrown off at first. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a weird post-credit scene. I'm like, oh, it's basically a trailer. And it was awesome. I can't wait for Doctor Strange 2. I am probably more excited for that movie than I was for this. Doctor Strange 2 is probably the movie, or any MCU project, that I'm most excited for since Endgame. I think it's going to be absolutely nuts. I love Scarlet Witch. I can't wait for what they do in that movie. Mordo, Shumagorath, and then you got the evil Doctor Strange in that trailer from What If. Like, whoa, okay. Well, I can't fucking wait for that movie. It's going to be incredible. So there you have it, guys. Spider-Man No Way Home is awesome. I loved it. It's easily my favorite of Tom Holland MCU movies. My second favorite Spider-Man movie overall after Into the Spider-Verse. Tier list dropping soon. Stay tuned for that. I had so much fun. I'm going to see it a second time, probably a third time with different people who haven't seen it yet. So I did this whole review, only seen it once. I wanted to wait to see it again to do my spoiler review, but it would end up getting too late. So here you have it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I know I'm a little rusty, maybe. The shadow is still here. I'm going to figure out how to fix that at some point, but I really wanted to get this video out and get back on my YouTube channel. I know I keep coming back at several different points saying I'm back. Should be for real this time. I've had a lot of things going on preventing me from really making videos and wanting to make videos too much. A few of you know a little bit of the specifics there, but I should be back for good now. We'll see. Fingers crossed. And I definitely got I know 2 more videos for sure that I got coming, the Spider-Man tier list and the MCU tier list. So I will see you guys soon.